Welcome. Lovely to see you all here. My name is Parker Menzimer. I'm the Public Programs Director at the Poetry Society of America. And this evening I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's program and our featured speaker, Ariana Reines. Tonight's talk is part of the PSA's ongoing lecture series, and for these events, we invite eminent poets, as well as critics and public intellectuals, to comment on a poet or a poetics or lineage that has merited their attention in some way. Perhaps it has moved them to admire it or moved them to scorn it. Perhaps it simply aroused their curiosity or raised questions that's pertinent to their work, but in any case, we invite speakers to think through out loud ideas about poets, poems, and books. Thank you all so much for being here this evening, for supporting the Poetry Society. Thank you for those of you tuning in on the live stream. The PSA is a member-supported organization, and it relies on guests, members, and ticket buyers like yourselves to do the work of placing poetry in public life. So tonight's program will run for about an hour, maybe a bit less, including 15 minutes of audience Q&A, which will take place after the lecture. We have books for sale, courtesy of Books or Magic, which is a shop just down the way on Smith Street. We have the Penguin Classics edition of Paradise Lost, and we have Reines' two newest poetry collections here, Wave of Blood and The Rose, and I hope that you will stick around after the program and buy a book and get it signed and chat. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ariana Reines. And I suspect that many of you here are admirers, readers of our speaker this evening. I, like probably many of you, have spent the past decade plus grappling with her momentous books. Reines' work opens spaces of intellectual and emotional inquiry that it feels that few writers are willing or able to explore. It synthesizes the personal and political, and not by a simple equation, but rather through sustained attention to their mutual dependency. Her work, in so doing, has that rare quality, fearlessness, unafraid of beauty and love. It thrills to joy, but also it explores ugliness, hurt, catastrophe, death, endings, abjection. Fearlessness in literature, and I think we all have had this experience, emboldens us to take a more expansive view of ourselves with all the personal and political potential that suggests. And I'm grateful that one of our great fearless poets has agreed to join us tonight. Reines will discuss the work of John Milton, the 17th century English civil servant who in some ways anticipated romanticism by making Satan an anti-hero. A noted monomaniac, Milton was a prolific poet and polemicist whose obsession with autonomy and the notion of freedom in some ways dovetails nicely with Reines' own work. Writing about Milton for her Invisible College, Reines has suggested that Paradise Lost is a suitable frame for some of the big questions. And this is a quote: "Who are we? Where did we come from? What is the true purpose of our technology, our longings? What happens when poetry is pushed to the very limits of human imagination?" And I look forward to pondering these questions with all of you tonight. Reines' newest books, as I mentioned, include Wave of Blood and The Rose. Her other collections include The Cow, Mercury, a sand book, which won the Kingsley Tufts Award and was longlisted for the National Book Award. She's also a playwright. Her Obie-winning play Telephone has been staged across the US and internationally. She's a translator. She's translated the Franco-Italian leftist collective TIQQUN. She's also translated the great poet maudit Charles Baudelaire and others. And she has held name chairs at institutions including UC Berkeley and Scripps College. And since 2020 has led her own experimental pedagogical universe, Invisible College, an online hub for the study of poetry, sacred texts, and the arts. Please welcome Ariana Reines.
Thank you. Parker, that was really beautiful. Thank you. I'm so nervous. We have to do a little bit of work here with the handout because we have to change the order, which is going to feel like college. So the front page, just turn to this rather risque portrait from the back. The best way to look at a great poet. This is Blake's frontispiece for his poem Milton, and Blake kind of depicted himself as in some ways being like inseminated by Milton via a star that impaled him in the foot. That's another image that appears in his own epic, which is called Milton. And the reason why I chose this, aside from that, I just think it's I just love the idea that Blake made this a frontispiece. I love beginning with the back. There's just something really satisfying about that. But what's really exciting to me about this is thinking about us being behind Milton, like he's ahead of us on some level. And the way I kind of want to frame the conversation for today is in a Uranian timescale. So how many astrologers do we have in the room? Just, you don't have to be pro, but if you read your horoscope, I'll call you an astrologer for today. Only 3 people read their horoscope, and I do not believe that. Okay, come on, you read your, I don't believe you. Whatever, okay, me and you guys. Uranus is a planet that was actually first seen through a telescope in the age of revolution, and it is associated with democratic revolution. So the planet Uranus has a connection to Prometheus. If we think about the story of Prometheus, the guy who stole the fire from the gods and gave it to the people, there's a democratic impulse in that is also connected to technology. If you think like fire is something that exists only for the gods, and then it becomes democratized and turns into like all of this tech that is connecting all of us. Does that make sense as a Uranian frame? So one of the things about the Uranian energy or the Uranian spirit is rebellion against authority. That's what Prometheus did. That's why he ended up chained to the rock for, eternities upon eternities. And that's kind of the era that we're in right now. Uranus has just changed signs, and because it is an outer planet, its movements mark epochs. So we've just entered the epoch of Uranus in Gemini, which is exciting for poets. Any Geminis in the room? Great. I can't believe there's only 2 Geminis in here. Incredible. And you're both sitting together, which is really beautiful. Thank you for identifying yourselves. Gemini is really the poet of the zodiac, and it represents intellection and the mind and language and speech. And when Uranus enters your sign, lightning inspiration, wild ideas, total expansion of consciousness, and also mass insanity ensue. So here we are at the dawning of the age of Aquarius and the age of Uranus and Gemini. So Milton is ahead of us. On some level, sorry, let me swallow my gum. So on some level, like we have yet to catch up to him. And Blake presented him in this way, in a very intentional way. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I came to study Paradise Lost as a teacher, and what that did to me and for me, and what brings us here at this moment looking at Milton's bum. So in the summer of 2023, the deaths of Kenneth Anger and Tina Turner were announced on the same day. They didn't die on the same day, but it was announced, I think, on May 24th. That's when I remember finding out about this. And I'm a student of synchronicity. I have a bad memory, like many writers, but I do pay attention to synchronicity, and I kind of set my life by it. So Tina Turner and Kenneth Anger on the same day. Does anyone not know who Tina Turner was? Cool. Kenneth Anger. Okay, you know who you don't? Okay, so Kenneth Anger was a seminal, literally seminal, cult gay avant-garde filmmaker. He arguably invented the music video, and he was a Satanist, actually, a very avowed Satanist. He made some movies that are remarkable. I think they're really beautiful, but a friend of mine once told me that Inauguration of the Pleasure, what are they called? Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, and there's another one, whatever. A friend, Scorpio Rising. Yeah. Some people find them a bit of a bad trip, but I think they're really beautiful. Anyway, Kenneth Anger, noted Satanist and pioneering gay filmmaker, and Tina Turner. I learned that they leave this earth on the same day, and I was thinking about, on the one hand, the meditation practice of Tina Turner, which she credited with getting her away from Ike and saving her life, and on the other hand, the Satanism, the sort of fearless Satanism of Kenneth Anger. And I thought, this is my signal to study Paradise Lost. And I'd been wanting to do it and working myself up to it, but I always need a strong signal to take the next step. And if you remember back in 2023, I know there's authors in the room. There was a moment when the humble brag was, if AI had stolen your book, you could post online that you were one of the people who had your book stolen. And then if your book hadn't been stolen, you could feel mad or whatever. It was a very innocent time. So I was really wanting to think about the connection between Prometheus, the democratization, if you will, of tech, of fire. I was wanting to think about the connection between Prometheus and the devil or evil. And I knew that on some level that had first been done by Milton, but I didn't really remember Paradise Lost very well. Oh shoot, I should have been timing myself. Okay, now I'm timing myself. You'll give me a signal, will you? When it's, yes, dun 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 dun. Okay, so this was all I remembered of Paradise Lost. I remembered there were two situations involving the sun. And I've given them to you here in this handout. We're not going to have time to read them closely, but one happens in book 3, and one happens in book 4. And I gave you the old-timey spellings in the first sample just for fun, and the modernized spellings in the second sample. So there's, in book 3, God speaks and talks about man, and also talks about the sun. The excerpt that I've given you is really God talking about liberty, which we're going to get to, freedom and liberty. But at the beginning of book 3, God addresses the sun and the light of the sun, and it's sort of it's almost like the sun is the divine emissary in this plane of being. And then the other thing about Paradise Lost that I remembered, vaguely remembered, because it didn't really penetrate when I read it in college, but I had this memory that Satan at some point curses the sun. And I thought, that's really, really interesting. It was hard for me to imagine hating life enough to curse the sun. But on some level, that's a bit of a surface thing. There's actually a lot of reasons why people curse the sun, and I want to talk about some of those. When Satan falls with all of the other rebel angels, he builds a palace in hell, and it is called Pandemonium, which is one of the many words that Milton coined. And it's lit by an artificial sun. So these were the memories that I had. God like addresses the sun and speaks about the freedom with which he has endowed his creations, us. And Satan curses the sun, and there's a false sun lighting the world of hell. So that false sun somehow represents technology, artifice. And I was trying to figure out, I wanted to figure out whether technology is always evil, whether techne or making always partakes of, let's say, maybe an ambivalent force that can tend toward the evil. These were the things I was trying to work out for myself, sort of as AI was on the horizon that it has now crested over. Is that making sense, more or less? I'm just curious, since there are so few astrologers and so few Geminis in this room, if anybody has read any of Paradise Lost. Okay, amazing, great. So you'll all grill me and you're all more knowledgeable than I am, surely. Has anyone read more than the first book of Paradise Lost? Pretty good, very good. Okay, impressed. I think I only got through 4 books in college. And what I remembered, it came from book 4. Like it was up to book 4 that these experiences of the false sun, the sun in the eyes of God, and the sun as Satan sees it. That's all I could remember. So I'm just going to back up for a second and maybe describe my relationship to the sun. And I'm going to try to do this quickly because I could go on and on about the sun. I had an unusual mystical experience involving the sun, and it actually happened here in New York on Allen Street during a very tormented time in my life. And I put this experience into a book. I transcribed it. Basically, I had been rehearsing a performance, and it was sort of overcast, and the rehearsals put me in a strange state of mind, and I sat down on this bench that is no longer there on Allen Street, and the sun came out from behind the clouds, and the sunbeams entered my head, and then I was filled with rapture, and then I started to take dictation. And the sun said all of this very groovy stuff. And so, and I had a lot of dysphoria around this mystical experience because I feel like it's only fascist poets who are addressed by the sun. And I felt really worried. Like it's there's something very bombastic about the solar poets. I'm thinking of Mayakovsky or Bataille. Like, it's just like, do I really want to go there? No. But I had a solar experience. And so I think that may be part of why I remembered Paradise Lost through its suns. But maybe I should back up. Since so many of you have read Paradise Lost, I think Parker's introduction to Milton was perfect. Monomaniacal, 17th century, failed revolutionary. What else do you need to know? Shall I say a few words about Mr. John Milton? Just a few. My goal with this talk, because it has to be so short, was really to prime us all into a state wherein we would be penetratable by this text, because it's a wall of sound, and it can really it can really be water off a duck's back. It can be hard to have it enter. And I think that it was quite unusual even in its day. I think that there, in some ways it can be an impenetrable text, but in other ways there's so many It rivals Shakespeare for how much of the language that we speak now and how much of the imagination that we share was actually invented inside of this. So a few little notes about Milton. John Donne was his local preacher, so that's who he heard in church on Sundays. Andrew Marvell, or Marvell, as some people refer to him, of the famous Vegetable Love, I think, is the guy who got him out of the tower toward the end of his life, saved his life, and made it possible for him to write Paradise Lost. He was a divorcee, which was a highly unusual in his time. I believe his wife, who was something of a party girl, found him a bit too dour. And he was indeed monomaniacal, deeply ambitious, totally convinced of his poetic vocation, and Paradise Lost was a goal that he had set for himself in youth. So it really represents the total flower and achievement and resolution of his lifelong ambition. Aside from the fact that there was a restoration to monarchy, and his life of writing revolutionary tracts was a complete failure. There's not time for me to address Milton and the question of poetry or serving the revolution, which is a very prescient question for our times. There's not time for me to sort of address the sexual politics of the epic. But I wanna do a few things to orient us with the structure of Paradise Lost, insofar as I understood it as a complete neophyte and someone with no real right to teach the poem, whatever it was, 3 years ago now. So what I told my students is, when you get lost in Paradise Lost, which you will, what you want to do is figure out your orientation. The whole poem is kind of structured in falls and recoveries and up and down. It's a lot of up and down, the whole poem. And whenever you're confused, you can figure out if you've fallen or if you're writing yourself. And I like this because we get a horizontality. So we have up and down from Milton, but we get a sense of teleological horizontality from Blake, who has a prophetic imagination and a sense of a general telos, or meaning in time. Like we're marching forward towards something, and somehow Milton is ahead of us. Good so far? Okay. So we only have 10 minutes left, right? It's hard to fit it all in this time. So let me adjust. Let's all take a look at the very start of the poem. Oh, okay. So the reason why at the bottom corner, you see kind of the traditional opening lines of the Odyssey and the Aeneid. And the reason why I put these here is partly to cast us in the masculine tradition of the epic mode. I sing of arms and the man. I used the Lombardo translation of Homer because it's got a little nod to Nabokov in it. Speak memory of the cunning hero. So the epic mode is a classical mode from Greece and Rome, and it's usually talking about a single hero. And what's crazy about what Milton does with the epic mode in applying it to the Bible, which is a story that everyone knew. It's the Titanic problem. You know exactly what happens in the story. And he turns it into something suspenseful, dramatic, surprising, and capacious. And I can't prove this because, but maybe a scholar could, I don't know. But to me, the beginning of this epic is remarkably feminine, maybe just because of the letter O, of man's first disobedience. There's something about the of that it's both like highly technical, like it's like that's how treatises begin, but it has an alreadiness about it, which is also gesturing to the sort of imminent time of sacred time of man's first disobedience. You could say like it's of man's first disobedience, but I like to think about the of as somehow this opening. And it's an opening to song. And I could go on and on about Milton's hatred of rhyme, but let's just leave it here. One of the many radical things about this text is it does not rhyme. One of the things that Milton thought was shackling human consciousness was rhyme. He thought it was stupid. He thought that rhyme forced poets to deform and pervert their logic in order to achieve rhyme. He thought it made things sound stupid. He thought it was annoying. He was happy to get rid of it. He didn't use it. But what we also have is a really modern experience of enjambment with this poem right at the very beginning. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit. And actually, we could spend an hour just on this line. So already, the fruit, man's first disobedience and the fruit, somehow like are you seeing the fruit physically? Is it the apple that you're seeing? The fruit of that forbidden tree, or is the fruit recursive? Is the fruit itself the man? The fruit is the fruit of the disobedience, which is to say, it's us. It is I, the reader. It is you. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe with loss of Eden, till one greater man. So, man and man, this is another thing that will happen throughout the epic, is doubling. There's going to be two of everything. There's two kinds of falling. There's the fall that Satan experiences out of heaven into the world. There's the fall that Adam and Eve experience out of Eden into our world. There's two kinds of sex. There's the sex that happens before the apple has been tasted. And then there's the much more lecherous, darker, maybe hotter sex that happens once the apple has been bitten. So everything in here will double, and this man and man is that again, and we have the singular man, the savior, and the general man, which is supposed to include all of us, man's first disobedience. It's both specific and universal. Till one greater man restore us, so we've fallen and then we get restored. Restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd, David, I guess, King David, who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos, again, up out of chaos, or if Sion Hill delight thee more. I love how associative he is already at the very beginning. And Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight. Okay, so again, it's only you're only up or down. There's no middle in Milton. No middle in Milton, except for maybe we are the middle. We're living in the torment of the middle. With no middle flight, intends to soar above the Aeonian mount while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme, to boldly go where no man has gone before. So we're pretty much at time, and I'm just going to say a few more things about sort of structurally about the way the epic proceeds, because I think if you know that the whole thing is falling down and recovering and standing back up again, structurally, you can get through it. But what I haven't had time to really treat seriously is the issue of liberty, of being free to fall, and that the problem of having been created free to fall, or if you will, the blessing and the mystery of having been created free to fall. So does anybody remember what the stated thesis was for Milton? There was a very simple intention that he had with this epic. It's got a good ring to it. It's a phrase that you probably know. To justify the ways of God to man. Right? So that's the purpose of this poem, to justify the ways of God to man. And the way he does this is through a very, very subtle meditation on liberty. So I want to look at, just to close, let's look together. Let's look together at, this is God speaking in book 3. I'll just read it to you and maybe gloss it a tiny bit. And hopefully that this will open up some thoughts, remarks, and questions that we can then have in dialogue. And now, through all restraint, broke loose, he wings his way not far off heaven in the precincts of light, directly toward the new created world. And man there placed with purpose to essay if him by force he can destroy, or worse, by some false guile pervert, and shall pervert, for man will hearken to his glozing lies, and easily transgress the sole command, sole pledge of his obedience. So will fall he and his faithless progeny, whose fault? So we're talking about Satan, who's about to tempt and pervert Adam and Eve in Eden. Whose fault? Whose but his own? Ingrate. He had of me all he could have. I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. So this is God talking about Satan. Such I created all the ethereal powers and spirits, both them who stood and them who failed. Freely they stood who stood, and fell who fell. Not free, what proof could they have given sincere of true allegiance, constant faith, or love, where only what they needs must do appeared, not what they would? What praise could they receive? What pleasure I from such obedience paid, when will and reason also is a choice, useless and vain, of freedom both despoiled, made passive both, had served necessity, not me. So I want to talk about this with you. I want to talk about this freedom to fall, because even though he's talking about the angels in heaven, the whole epic is structured in doubles, in doublings, and we too, our grandparents, as it were, Adam and Eve, if you want to pretend to take the poem literally, they were free to fall, and so are we. And I'm curious, where people are actually in the room today, in this technological moment, in this political moment, in this highly censored and self-censorious moment. I'm really, really curious where people are in their bodies and in their souls and in their minds around a sense of freedom and personal agency. I'm very, very, very curious where this lives in us right now. So maybe I'll leave it there and then we'll chat. So I'm stopping. How do you want to chat, Parker?
So I think that the best way to do this would just be folks can speak up if you're able, and then perhaps you could repeat their question.
Oh, yeah.
For folks listening on the live stream, and then we can do it that way. And if someone feels unable to enunciate, you can take the microphone and I can bring it to you. Does that sound okay?
What if I'm unable to enunciate?
Microphone's right there.
Okay. Oh, beautiful. Okay, so, yeah, does anyone have a question? That's a lot of pressure for you, I suppose. Perhaps I might continue my remarks a bit further. No, yes.
Maybe just because I was excited for you to talk more with that last question, I'm kind of curious what you think. So this poem is about liberty and like the 1600s. How do you think it's like the themes in our articles, like things that we're going through currently politically, the world historically?
Great question. So the influence of this poem, it can't be overstated on the founders of our nation. I think for me, the most succinct and accurate way to think about this poem, I know Milton said that its purpose was to justify the ways of God to man, but I really think of the entire poem as an extremely sustained meditation and contemplation of the question of and the problem of human liberty and also of human bondage. It's very, very much also a parable of what it means to be enslaved. Milton was a very, very deep thinker of power. I'm not a Hegelian in the sense that I don't mean like I'm anti-Hegel, but I haven't read Hegel in 20 years, so that's what makes me not a Hegelian. But Milton was deeply influential to Marx, and I think every serious political thinker and pretty much every major revolutionary movement of the last 2 centuries at least, you can trace like an authenticated, scholarly, for real connection and inspiration to this poem. There's a great book by Orlando Reed called What in Me is Dark that's literally about that. It's about Milton influencing all different kinds of revolutionary thinkers and movements across time and space. And I think the reason why I wanted us to kind of look at Milton's bum as Blake imagined it and to see him like as this idealized almost demigod who's walking ahead of us is because in a lot of ways I think we haven't caught up to this kind of thinking, or like to this deep thinking or this deep a contemplation of the question of freedom. Like, what is freedom actually? And I think like it actually takes a lot of time to sit down and try and work that out. So we just heard God basically saying, whose fault is it that Satan fell, right? Whose fault is it? Not mine. I made him, he had everything he needed to stand. And again, upright, to stand, to fall. Like the whole poem is like that. At one point, Satan, it's very funny. At one point, Satan's heart actually like literally becomes, his heart is so atrophied that it just becomes a dick. Like it's either up or down. That literally happens in the poem. So that, if you imagine, like if you think about the world that we're living in right now, digitally, 0 and 1, yes and no, up and down. Like if we could reduce our lives to their constituent parts, like I suppose we're made of atoms, I suppose we're made of stardust, I suppose we're made of a complex amalgamation of yes and no, of 0 and 1. And actually, Milton is the most sustained and nuanced thinker of this problematic that I've found yet. And again and again, the characters who were so familiar to the world before Milton even wrote this poem. And he imagined them so capaciously that we don't even realize now that the Adam and Eve and the serpent and the Satan that we imagine it actually sprang from the head of Milton. That we are still living in the imaginary, the Judeo-Christian imaginary that Milton created, invented. We're basically living in a fractal that originated in his brain box, and that's pretty wild. So, Satan falls, right? Satan's in heaven, decides non serviam. I'm not serving anymore. He falls, and in the beautiful opening of the epic, which we didn't look at today, there's a marvelous speech, and it's one of the reasons why Milton's Satan is one of the most compelling, fascinating, attractive characters of the modern era, and the inspiration for so many Bronte love interests, and so many other heroic figures up into today. Satan and his compatriots are in a bad situation. They look around, they look at themselves, and they decide to make the best of a bad situation. And that's also what Adam and Eve will have to do when they get kicked out of Eden. And that's also what we have to do. We have to make the best of a bad situation. So in that sense, the poem is very apposite to any bad time, anything that goes wrong for a human being. This is the poem that is like dissecting and diagnosing the things that happen when things go wrong, and what is within your power to do, and what many of us fail to do, even though we're endowed with all the stuff that God gave us that should make us able to stand. But for whatever reason, many of us can't or don't. Does anyone else want to jump in? Yes. Phoebe.
Thank you so much. Can you say more about this? What an incredible first word. Of is belonging. Of then appears in the Virgil and the Homer.
Yes.
And then it appears 7 times in this first sentence, which is such an incredible number in this biblical text, right? Can you please speak more about of?
That's so beautiful. I actually never counted the ofs, but I love that it's a Saturn amount of ofs in the opening sentence. How perfect for such a Saturnine poem. So this I'm gonna do it. It sprang into my head, and then I was like, don't do it, but I'm gonna do it. The first time I ate mushrooms, Heroes Dose, high school. Guess what word I had an overwhelming experience of? Yeah, it was of, like, with like drum and bass, Of is to me, it's fascinating. But I did say, and I still say, maybe if I were, like a Saussurean, or if I was like a real linguist, and I could back this up like phonemically and like all these other ways, or I could like index all the times that anything had ever begun with that word. And I can't justify this in some rationalist way, but there's something in the ofness of that reminds me of an embrace or an enclosure, almost like the Edenic wall that within which the garden is still blooming. It creates, like, I see a pregnant belly, I see the globe, I see the O of song. Like, I can't help but see those things in that of. And it's interesting. Instead of beginning, I sing, and there's believe me, it's not like Milton is not a self-effacing person, nor was he a self-effacing poet, nor did he need to be. I'm not mad about him being monomaniacal. He knew he was ahead of his time, And I'm grateful for his outsized self-confidence. I feel like, you know, poets need it, especially in bad situations. You know, when you're in the tower, you want to have a little faith in yourself. But yeah, he doesn't begin I. He doesn't begin I, and he's not doing that mysterious gesture that begins the Odyssey. I love that phrase. I don't know how Emily Wilson translates the beginning of the Odyssey, but I just love speak memory is very beautiful to me, and it's calling out. It's calling out and asking for memory herself to speak. Right? We are asking for help from the muses, but I just love that. I just love that we don't hear I until I think, I don't know, is that the 12th line? It takes a while. But anyway, nothing I've said is scientific, or I feel like you have things to say about it that are probably better than what I just said.
No, but it is the 12th line, which is then also interesting with the 7 and the 12.
Yes.
Something with the completion there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I have a question about the tropes of refusal and agency, also in the context of now, but in the context of the poem. I work with surveillance and technology, often on issues of bodily autonomy. So autonomy and freedom are very resonant for me. I wonder what you make of a world in which we consent to so many things, or assent, I should say, for convenience, and we cannot consent to so many more control systems. And now the vox clamantis against things like the encroachment of AI is the Pope set against what, Peter Thiel now as the Antichrist. There's a lot going on here. I'm wondering if you're feeling the same vibrations I am.
I'm with you. Well, I mean, I would call this irony.
Yes.
Yeah, it's indeed ironic that it's the Catholic Church that comes to the rescue at this particular juncture. There's a bitterness to that irony. There's some sweetness to it as well. I think that, like, the thing that helps me in thinking these technological and like socio-political problems of the soul is to try and take a really long time scale with them. That's also why I like having Milton ahead of me, naked, in Blake's view of him. On the one hand, I think that Milton would have been disgusted with the passivity of the mass of people, as he was in his time. He thought most people were slaves, like in their heads. And I want to say something, because I didn't appropriately address like the master-slave dynamic in Paradise Lost, because it's very, very active in the epic, and I feel like a lot of those implications are also still ahead of us, like have yet to be fully addressed, witnessed by the culture, and like set into motion, or like and ourselves set into motion accordingly. So who would hate the sun? I thought to myself when I was remembering Satan cursing it. And I thought, I've had a mystical experience with the sun. The sun is like my only friend. Like I can't imagine being so fucked up that I would curse the sun. But of course I was thinking superficially, and I started, when you think a little bit more deeply, have you ever hated the sun when you have a hangover? Have you ever hated the sun when you were deeply depressed? Have you ever been so depressed that you really, really, that the sight of life in all its beauty was an agony to you? Let's take it a step further. Have you ever had to do hard labor in the sun? because people who have that experience do not think the sun has a smiley face and is their friend, you know? And this is one of the things that I think is amazing about the poem. Like, and you're talking about surveillance and bodily autonomy. There's something wild about the ocularity of Paradise Lost. I didn't mention that Milton was blind at the time of its composition, that he dictated it to his daughter and another amanuensis, and the poem would come to him about 12 lines a night, and he would deliver them in the morning. And he referred to himself as a cow, which I love, that he feminized, that he became pregnant, that he became full of milk, and he talked about needing to be milked in the morning. Another way to read the poem is through blindness and insight, through obscurity and vision. And again and again, there's also a kind of perspective that is cinematic, and that it could be argued Milton invented the wide pan. You could argue that he invented world building, science fiction, and like serial television and all of that, like sweeping visual imagination as we have come to know it. And actually, in a lot of ways, Paradise Lost, like the kind of amazing sweeping shots and the incredible panopticon of the vision of the poem itself, we have yet to have the technology to actually show this anywhere but in your own head while you're reading it. So there's a gaze that pervades everything, and you get an experience of that godlike gaze from the poem. On some level, he's up, and again, the poem is always operating on that. Up is good, down is bad. Like we're operating in that framework. But God, the God's eye view is fractal. It's almost psychedelic. It's everywhere. And there is this weird anxiety, I think, right now that, like, if you were a total artist or if you were a total angel, you would have no problem being witnessed and gazed upon in every single particle of your day and every single action that you take. Like your soul sees it, God sees it, Larry Ellison sees it, you know. So we have these titans now who are accumulating data and building a Tower of Babel, which is not a biblical story that appears in this epic, and maybe a conversation for another day. We're in this moment where that is happening. The idea that if we accumulate all of this information, that we'll somehow reach the singularity, which is, it's a kind of funny idea. But I also, there's something to me, like, I'm sorry it's taking me so long to answer your excellent question. There's something fictive about this problem. There's something deep inside me that rejects the Pope versus Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel's not the Antichrist. Like, he's just like a weird guy. And the Pope is not our savior, although he is from Chicago, where many of our saviors come from. But there's something about this drama that, to me, like a lot of the woman in me just like doesn't want to accept that these are the players, that this is the story. There's something concatenated or like made up about it to me. Do you know what I mean? Does it feel that way to you?
Absolutely.
I saw another hand. Yeah.
When you're talking about the woman in you, when I first started hearing you talk about technology and AI in context of Paradise Lost, it all just sort of clicked in this really intense way around the Epstein files, because it's so interesting to me that this gender, this feminism that runs through the entire text. Like, for example, earth. Like he talks about like a dove brooding, and the dove, the brooding dove, which is inherently a female dove, makes the void pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about of, and then there's this amazing moment in book 8 where Adam is talking to Raphael and about like the cosmos and like all of these things, and she's asking him these incredibly complicated questions which he can't answer, so she just leaves. She just like walks away and contemplates on her own. And when you brought in AI, which was not a connection, I was able to make on my own, I was just like, oh my God, we are behind this text. And I just like, anyway, like, what are your thoughts?
Okay, that was beautiful. Okay, last answer. Okay. Eve is an amazing character. I didn't give her the appropriate attention today. She's an extraordinary character in the poem. The conversations that Adam and Eve have with Raphael are wonderful. And there's just to give a little bit more doubling, because you mentioned Epstein, something that was never taught to me about the poem and was never made much of is there's a fascinating, we get to meet Satan's daughter, who is the product of rape and incest. And it's both an extremely grisly and somewhat comical scene, like darkly and bleakly comical. But sexual violence exists in this poem. And in fact, I think this poem is so sensitive to what free love could really be, that it allows the reader to compare and contrast in all the freedom and sovereignty of her own mind and imagination, and look at what sex looks like, what lovemaking looks like in Eden, what equality between a man and a woman, between Adam and Eve, look like before the fall. You get to contemplate this exquisitely free and filial and not boring, peaceable world. And then you get to see the dark and dirty shit that happens, and how much darker and dirtier it gets the more steps you take away from Eden. So I guess that's a way of saying I feel like there's a great sensitivity in the orientation toward the feminine in this poem, I find, that I think was remarkable for its time. And because of the way the poem is structured, because you will always have a compare and a contrast, you can again and again weigh and measure circumstances and decide of your own free will what it is that you're seeing and how to understand it. So the poem itself has a way of activating the individual sense of personal will, I think, not in a Nietzschean way, in a very subtle and perhaps Christian way. So maybe we'll leave it at that for today. Yeah? Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.